Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Happy Canada Day again to all my Canadians at home and abroad. It's a long holiday weekend. So the Canada Day started yesterday. It continues today for some people, and tomorrow, Monday, is also Canada Day because it fell on a Saturday. My name is Francisca Epale. I am a certified health and life coach, a real estate investor, a former educator who has taught ESL and French for over 20 years in the United States, in Canada, and China, from middle school to university levels. I am also a speaker with a DTM designation, Distinguished Toastmasters. I am also an author of 4 books and a wealth creator with the Mind Assistance Program, aka the Map Book. Yesterday, I talked about the power of French interpretation serving as a voice for the voiceless, and I told you it is one of the best jobs I've had in my entire life. However, all that glitters is not gold. I would like to tell you or to share with you some of the downsides of being a French interpreter. So if you decide to go into interpretation, you are aware of it. Or if you were to become a service provider, you will be aware of some of the downfalls. So the first one is, I was called one day by the authorities. It was a Sunday afternoon, and they called me. They said, "Oh, can you make it at the police station as soon as you can?" I said I could be there in the next 1.5 hours because I'm cooking. They said, "No, we need you ASAP, right now." I said, "Okay, how am I going to get there ASAP?" "Don't worry, we're going to send a police cruiser." "Oh, really?" "Okay, it's an unmarked car, not a police car." No, they said they're going to send a police with a non-marked car. So the vehicle pulled into my driveway, and I asked the fellow, "May I know your name? Do you have any form of ID?" He showed his police badge. He said, "That was a good one. What you did was good." So I asked the police for their ID. They're always asking us for ID, so the roles were turned. The roles were reversed. So when I got to the police station, I was interpreting for one young girl, and the girl used a word that I did not know. So I told the police, "I don't know that word." The police said, "You can only know that word unless you are a prostitute. Don't worry, we know what the word meant." So sometimes if the client uses a word and you do not know, be honest and tell them you don't know the meaning of the word. So that's one downfall of being an interpreter. Or if it's a word you do not know, you can ask them, "May I look it up? I'm not sure of the word." There is nothing wrong with that. Okay. The second downfall, or the second a disadvantage of being a French interpreter, or any other interpreter, sometimes there is a rift between service provider and the clients. They may not all get along. There was a time when I was called to do an interpretation at the private home of a client. This client, I've worked with them for about 2 years. They had a situation where I had to work with them 3 times a week. I went to their home. For some reason, the service provider and him, they just could not get along. The client insulted the service provider, and the service provider insulted back. I'm not going to interpret insults. So they were going back and forth, and I stood up. I said, "Hey, stop! Hey, arrêtez!" in French. "I have come here to interpret. If you are going to start to insult each other, I'm going to leave." And then I said it in French. I'm here to interpret. I'm not here to be listening to insults. It's very unprofessional. Then they stopped. And then I had to continue the interpretation. And I did report the incident because ironically, the service provider did not put it in her notes. And I reported the incident. Then Another incident happened. This same service provider and this client had a little misunderstanding again at another location, until the client pointed a finger at the service provider, and the wife was yelling at him, "Stop! Stop!" And the service provider insulted him, and they were at loggerheads. I reported the incident again, so now they had to get a new service provider. They realized that service provider was a female, and this man, the client, they could not get along. So they chose a male for him to work with. Okay. Then, another incident which was very interesting, I was called to do an interpretation at a mental institution. As I said yesterday, I've been in all kinds of settings, the good, the bad, and the ugly. As I entered the room with the mental patient, I just suddenly saw a shoe thrown at me, and I had to duck. Woo! I said, "What was that?" I asked the service provider. The service provider said, "Oh, it's okay. We're used to that." I said, "But is that how it's going to be? They're going to throw a shoe at me?" "No, it's okay." So I came back and I started to interpret. Without in a split second, I saw another shoe. Boop! I had to dodge. I remember there was a former US president who went to the Middle East, and a journalist threw a shoe at him. So I said to my heart, do I look like a US president where they're throwing shoes at me? So I told the service provider, "I'm gone. I'm not." She said, "Come back." I said, "I'm not coming back, because twice now the man's shoe threw a shoe at me. So the third time, what's he going to throw? I'm not coming back. So I'm sorry." So I went back and I called the agency. I told them what happened, and they still paid me even though there was no signature. I told them exactly what happened, and they said if they care, they can call and find out. So sometimes you're put in a dangerous situation. Another instance where I had a situation was when the clients, we were in a big boardroom with so many people, and the client sat next to me. The service provider was speaking, and the client said to me, "The service provider is lying." So I told him, "Do you want me to interpret that?" He said, No. I said, "Then only say what you want me to interpret." I had to use wisdom. The client told me that the service provider is lying, and there were about 12 people there. So as a client, if you want us to interpret, only say what you want to be interpreted. Don't say anything that you don't want the interpreter to interpret. Another thing, another disadvantage or something that is not so good, as an interpreter, we are advised not to laugh. No matter how funny the situation is, they tell us not to laugh, because if we laugh, the clients may think that we are laughing at them, because they come from different educational backgrounds and different cultures with different mindsets. So they tell us not to laugh. But there was a situation where it was so funny I couldn't help it. I laughed, and the service provider told me off that, "Mrs. Interpreter, you're not supposed to laugh." And I gave her a stern look as if to say, "Relax." At the end of the session, she apologized. She said, "I'm sorry if I yelled at you." I said, "I couldn't help it. It was funny." She said, "Yes, you're right. Maybe I overreacted." Then there was a situation too of a fellow who was sharing his refugee story of why he wanted to stay in Canada. It was so funny that in order to control my laughter, I had to turn. I turned my head, and the judge realized that I was turning my head to prevent myself from laughing. The judge said, "Madam Interpreter, this story is very funny, it's very hilarious. I'm giving you time to laugh. You're turning your face because you're trying to avoid laughing. So we're not allowed to laugh as an interpreter." So if you're somebody who likes to laugh and you want to become an interpreter, you have to control your laughter. No laughter. You have to remain neutral. Another thing which I found very uncomfortable sometimes were some of the stories of the domestic abuse. When I first began interpretation, I began in November 2013. When I first began, when I listened to the horror stories, I would get literally drained. I would take it so personally, but they told me, don't take it personally, it's just a job. One of the stories that they told me was, it was so sad. I don't even know whether I should share it. Okay, I'll share it, but I will not mention the country. This lady said that she has become crazy. So the service provider asked her, how did you become crazy? She said that she was in her home country and soldiers burst into their home with a gun and asked the father to sleep with the daughter. So the father said, no, this is my daughter. I can't sleep with her. Yes, they had a gun on his head. And they told him, if you don't do what we say, we're going to shoot you. So she said the father slept with her. And after he had slept with her, the soldiers killed the father, but kept her alive. So because of that, she became crazy. So I asked somebody, because sometimes the clients do lie. I asked somebody who came from that same country. If it is true, he said, oh yes, it's very frequent. Oh, I said, okay. So that was a very touching story. It was very sad. So sometimes we hear some kind of horror stories as interpreters. We hear the good, the bad, and the ugly. So we just have to remain neutral. They tell us, remain neutral. And if it is so bad, you can ask them for a 15-minute break. If they feel that if you're so touched by the story and you cannot continue, they tell you, okay, ask for a 15-minute break, go outside, drink water, have something, then you can come back. But it's part of the job. So on the whole, being a French interpreter, it's a very interesting job because we work in all kinds of settings. As I mentioned yesterday on my video, we work in the medical field, in the legal, education, social services. And I was even invited once to interpret at an international conference. And I told them I am not a conference interpreter. I'm a community interpreter. They said I came highly recommended. So I went out of town. They paid my hotel and transportation and everything. So it was interesting. So to conclude, being a French interpreter, it's a very nice job. But all that glitters is not gold. Many people think that being an interpreter is a very glamorous job. It's a glamorous job to an extent, but there are also some pitfalls which I have just named a few. Thank you very much for listening. If you are a Canadian, continue to enjoy your Canadian weekend. Thank you very much for listening. Have a good morning. Have a good afternoon, have a good evening, and I wish you a very prosperous and blissful week ahead. I will be speaking next Saturday. I haven't yet decided on the topic. Sometimes I decide on a topic and I change my mind. So I don't know the topic I will be talking about next Saturday. If you have anything in mind you would like me to talk about, please jot it in the comments below. Thank you very much. Bye for now.